If I was to pick one thing that was invented that I think is just amazing, maybe one of the greatest things ever invented, I would have to go with something you may not be thinking of at first. I would be thinking of paper. Paper is awesome because of the potential that it represents. For kids or even adults, it represents things like planes, spitballs, which are awesome when you're the one shooting them, and gross when you're the one receiving them. When I was a kid, I would take paper like this and we would draw out comic book characters and stories. We would write tales on them. In fact, one time in middle school, I was able to write a story and illustrate it for our whole class. And all of their stories got connected in kind of an anthology. And we sent it to Ray Bradbury. And they sent it back. And he had drawn and written all over it. And because I drew the cover on a piece of paper just like this, I got to keep that. And it's at my house right now with Ray Bradbury's comments and drawings all over that thing that I had made. And for me then, this becomes not just a piece of paper, it becomes something that wows me and I'm kind of in awe of every time I go to pull it out and look at it. As you get older, paper becomes a couple other things. It becomes a place for your deep thoughts. It becomes a place to express your love. If you've ever written a note or an anniversary card, it becomes reminders of important things in hard times. Like I have an ordination certificate. It's just a piece of paper. But when I'm having an extremely hard day in ministry, I go and I look at that and I am reminded again that this is real, that I'm called, and that there are people that believe in me. And I need it. We use paper to record and to represent our lives and our dreams, whether it's a screenplay or whether you wrote Dear Diary, and you know how important that is because you don't want anyone else to find it and read it without your permission. And so today, as we talk about your life and my life and how God's grace intersects with it, maybe we can use this piece of paper to represent us. Because I believe that our life is a gift from God that is full of incredible potential. Like I cannot dream up what this could become. And that each gift that God's given, each life that God has given, He has given on purpose. There is a plan, there is a purpose, there is a reason for it. There are good things prepared in advance for each life. And the question that we have to ask is, will we cooperate with His purpose and His plan? I mean, we have a say on what is going to get written on this life, the story that it tells, how it will be used. And for a lot of us, we begin our lives with hope and optimism. Like when you have a kid, most kids, when you ask them what they're going to be, they say things like, I want to be a professional football player, I'm going to be an astronaut, I'm going to invent a new type of Pop-Tart. They've got these incredible, optimistic dreams, and then something along the way replaces that with guilt or with loneliness or with despair. Maybe you can even pinpoint some of the places in your life where that started to happen. One of the big hits in the church world of 1922 was a song called I'd Rather Have Jesus. And it names this problem that shows up in our lives by saying that we become held in sin's dread sway. Now this looks different for each of us, but dread sway that sin holds us in is basically this. We are being pulled into destructive places and in destructive ways. And we are doing this because sin has enslaved us. We are trapped in whatever it has that has gotten a hold of us. For some, that's an addiction. And if you have that or you've seen that, you know what it's like to want desperately to not have something in your life, but you just cannot figure out a way to get rid of it. For others, it's a double life, where you look one way, maybe at work or with your family, but when you're by yourself or with this other group of people, you have this completely different life, and you are struggling to make sure that those two stay separate and do not mix. And there seems to be, whatever it is, no way to be freed from the stuff that you are going through. These things happen sometimes when our life gets pushed on by outside forces. There's these things that want to maybe rip us or crush us. Like I worked with homeless people in a homeless community and a rescue mission when I was in Kansas City. And I was there, that I found out a lot of the people that are there feel like they've just become a number. The things in their lives have kind of pushed in on them, whatever the circumstances are, and they feel like they don't have a way out. They feel like they're not even human anymore. And so it's easier for them when they feel so desperate to go out and steal or find ways to cheat or find something to do, because they need that bread or that cheeseburger desperately just to survive. And it feels like all of this optimism, all this stuff it could possibly be, just gets crushed away out of it. And it just becomes whatever it is that has been pressed against it. In the book of Luke, he tells the story in chapter 18 of a man who knew what this was like. He's described simply as a blind beggar. I mean, his birth has already seemed to rob him and crush him of the potential that he thought he had at first, because he can't see, which means he can't work, which means he can't provide for himself, which means he's dependent on others and just gets passed around by person to person who can help him get where he can go and beg. And when he gets there, what you don't often read about, but what happened is, yes, he's begging for money, but there were often people that would come and take from him, because what's he going to do? He can't even see if they drop in a penny and take out a 20. And what chance does he have to write this incredible story when everything seems to be crumpled up with the pressures that's going on against him? Sometimes the sin that enslaves us is sin that comes through our own choices in a different way. It's not just picking choices that help us survive, but it's seeing things and thinking that we know best. We're going to take care of ourselves. And usually when we know best, it looks like this. Our wisdom says, look out for number one. Put me first. Put my group first. And do what you want. Right after Luke writes about this blind beggar, he introduces us to a guy named Zacchaeus who personifies this. Now, Zacchaeus was born short and probably not the most attractive guy, and so he didn't have everything going for him either. But instead of becoming like the beggar, he's decided, instead of being crushed like this, he is going to be crushing others. He is going to write his own story, and no one is going to stop him. And so he writes a story by becoming a tax collector for Rome. What that means is that he is the most hated person in his community, because they feel like he has betrayed his faith and his family and his country. He's decided that he's going to keep writing his own story, though, because not only is he going to take the taxes from them, but he's going to enrich himself by robbing them and being corrupt and taking more than he's supposed to. And so he ends up with this life that he's written for himself that is one where, if he's honest, is a life where the life that he's written for himself is one of shame. It's not a story that he wants to tell his kids or his family. It's not one that he wants to live in that much himself. But that's what doing things his own way has gotten him. And whether you feel like you've written a story that's led to shame and guilt, or you feel like you've led a story where you've been crushed and the possibilities have been taken away from you, either way, what you end up is this life that you cannot fix on your own. There's not enough good deeds you can do. There's not enough acts of discipline or the will that is going to make this thing look like it did before. The wrinkles, the crumples, all this stuff, the shape. There's some things you're not going to be able to do with this anymore. The word is not going to come off on your own. And whether it's from the outside voices telling you you are nothing, or the inner voice that tells you you need to hide because of your shame and your guilt, many of us feel like when you get to this point, we're good for one thing. We take the life that had so much potential, a life that was given on purpose, and we feel like the only place left for it is to go in the trash. But thanks be to God. God's grace reaches even to the trash heaps and the trash cans. In fact, he invites us in those places to find him in a new way, to find not just that he is seeking us, but to find out that his grace can save us. In Luke 18, the beggar that is there had never experienced grace before, but they'd heard the stories of Jesus. And he hears the buzz as Jesus is coming by into town in Jericho. He realizes grace is coming to him, and he desperately cries out for help. And as he's doing that, the others that are used to dismissing him and taking advantage of him try to silence him and get him to be quiet and remind him that he's not worth the effort. But still he cries out. And when Jesus gets to him, he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" "I want to see," he replied. And in verse 42, Jesus says to him, "Receive your sight. Your faith has healed you." And that word for healed is the same word that was translated saved. God's grace has reached him even as he's begging on the side of the road. And it sets him free from his blindness. It sets him free from the pressure that had crumpled up his life for so long. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When this happens in our lives, it might not feel immediate, but there is nothing, even things that you are born with, even things that you feel are enormous and cannot be overcome, there is nothing that Jesus cannot free you from. Zacchaeus had a different experience for his sin problem. He didn't cry out. Instead, when he heard that Jesus was coming by, he went and he hid in a tree because he wanted to be able to see Jesus, and he knew he couldn't do that in the midst of the crowd with his height issues and stuff, but he also didn't want to be exposed. So he wanted to be close, but not too close. He just wanted to, I don't know, maybe he didn't even feel like he was worth getting that close. Maybe he was worried about what would happen if he had the repercussions. And like a lot of people, like we talked about last week, there are some people that we just feel are so far from God, maybe God's grace can't even reach them. But when Jesus came to the spot where he was up in the tree, he looks right up at him and calls him down by name and invites himself to Zacchaeus' house, which was scandalous. Because how can this holy man, the Son of God, go and eat at this guy's house when he knows how unclean he is, when he knows how much he's done wrong and how he's robbed people and what he's done? And can you imagine the list of complaints that are against him? And yet he still goes and eats in his home together. Because grace isn't dependent on your condition. It's not dependent on Zacchaeus' condition. You don't clean yourself up to receive grace. You don't go and make sure you've got all these boxes checked before grace arrives. Grace is not dependent on your condition. Grace changes your condition. And so Zacchaeus has Jesus come to his house, and he starts to work immediately to repay those that he's wronged. He gives them back what he's taken plus interest. He wants to bless the community. He's not worried about looking out for himself first anymore. Why has this change happened? Because in verse 9, Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what is lost." Convinced that Christ's ways were better than his own, Zacchaeus lived into the grace that was already extended to him and found that he was not alone. He had a place to belong. You see, God's saving grace sets us free to be connected to Christ, to the real life that comes from Him. You see, Christ comes close to you and I, and if we accept Him, He gets to work. And all of the shameful story that you've written, that you tossed into the trash can, He's going to start pulling things out, and He's going to pull it out, and it's going to look a little different because He's going to erase what you've written on it. The shameful stories, the guilt, He takes away. We use a word called justified to describe this. And what that means is it's just as if I have never sinned. So there's no need for guilt and shame to be plastered all over your story anymore. And all of the wrinkles and tears, He comes to heal. He gives new life. Instead of existing with all the wrinkles and tears, He helps to make you new. And then He begins to do something else. He begins to write His story out through your life. And where it used to be shame, now it says hope. Now it says love. Now it says peace. And it's not just a story that exists on its own. Your story, your paper now becomes a part of His story, right? You are now connected to all that came before you and all that's coming after you in the kingdom, in the family of God. Connected with Him, you will know who you are. When you know who you are, you will know what to do and how to write out the story that He has always intended for you to have. A story where you are connected to Him, to others, and to yourself, and you are not enslaved by that which wants to destroy you from the beginning. I first met Tandy when I was dropping off bread on a run we used to do, which was like go pick up some bread, go to these different places, drop it off, lower income places that may not have the best people in them or the best resources available. And Tandy ran a facility for adults with disabilities. When you went to the door to meet her, she was always smiling. She was always laughing. And so we struck up a friendship over time. And I learned afterwards that looks can be deceiving when it came to Tandy. You see, she was happy and smiling, but that was the facade that she put up to hide all these things that she didn't want anyone to know about. Because if she looked like that, you didn't ask any more questions, you didn't dig any deeper, you didn't go in to find out that she was having a romantic relationship with her business partner that she shouldn't be having, and that was a toxic mess that was just destroying both of them. You wouldn't look closer to find out how tight the money situation was and how there had been times when she was felt forced to do things that were illegal in order to keep the business open. I didn't know any of that at first, right? There was too much shame involved for her to share that and put that out in the open, but Jesus knew. And Jesus kept seeking after her and drawing her closer and closer to Himself. She started to come and visit us at church, and then she'd come again and again, and she made some new friends, and she just kept coming. And then one day, while she was sitting on the front porch waiting for bread to arrive, which I wasn't even doing anymore, she'd had enough. And I think she kind of realized that Jesus had drawn near. And she cried out, hoping He would hear her. And she found that He was right there, calling her by name, inviting Himself not just to be close, but to come into her home and into her heart and into her life and get to work, changing her from the inside out. She describes that day as the day that freedom came, like nothing she'd ever experienced before. And like the beggar, she started to follow Jesus immediately and praised him all of the way. She got out of that relationship that was tearing her apart. She sold the business to be able to repay back what she should not have had. And she started fresh. And now if you meet her, she's still smiling, she's still laughing, but it's genuine now. There's not this gap between what she shows and who she is. And she is the most caring person that I know. That is the saving grace of God. So how are you responding to that grace? That grace that is far more than just a ticket to heaven. If you know that grace, remember, how is your story, your life, being used to tell his story? And if you feel like you're still in the trash can, or that's where you belong, he's ready to come and trade all of your ashes, all of your guilt, all of your shame, all of your hurt for the beautiful life that he can give and restore in you. Heavenly Father, I pray that for those who are here that know what it means to be saved by you, we wouldn't take it for granted, but we would be reminded again of how incredible a miracle it is that you would do that for us. And help us to live into the grace that you have already extended. And for those that feel like that is something they are desperate for, may now be the time where they find that you have drawn close, that you are walking by, that you stopped right in front of them, that you are looking right at them, that you are calling them by name, and you are ready to get to work in their lives to clear out any shame and guilt because you have done what you needed to on the cross to offer forgiveness and freedom to anyone for anything. And that they can confess that to you and turn from that and find that you are ready to give them a clean slate and a new life. That's not just on their own, but a life that is connected to you and to your people. A life that has hope and purpose, that is defined by love and peace and wholeness. And that they can be yours. And that their life can tell your story to the people closest to them. That they too might learn what it means to find the saving grace of God, even when they feel like they should be in the trash. Thank you. We pray this in your name.